Yes, we are live. Good afternoon, everyone. Good afternoon. Good afternoon. We're just so excited for this Sunday afternoon. Welcome to everyone who's joining us on Facebook, everyone who's joining us on YouTube, and everyone who's joining us on Twitter. We're absolutely so excited. Welcome to everyone who's joining us on Facebook, everyone who's joining us on YouTube, and everyone who's joining us on Twitter. We're absolutely so excited. Sorry, my computer was playing tricks on me.
Okay, so experiencing some technical difficulties. He will be back in a few, but we just really want to begin by welcoming everybody to today's event. We are so excited to have such powerful speakers here, and the Tlokonolo is back just in time.
I'm so sorry. It just feels like the patriarchal, anti-women gods are trying to fight with us today, and my internet is acting up. But I'm back, and it's going to be an absolutely wonderful discussion. I was just talking to some of the people in the studio and thinking about like the work that we do at the Cheekinators. I think a large amount of the conversations we have at the Cheekinators pertain to archiving and thinking really about like what is the space of like people who've sort of been pushed to the margins. And I think this conversation more than that brings us closer to bringing people back into the fold, right? We as a platform are here to create spaces for conversations that are important, and we think this conversation is a really important conversation. I wanted to read from Mmatshilo's Reweaving the Soul of the Nation, a quote from there which says, "By creating sacred sites of healing, we will release from the heart of a rock a feather that will heal the fragile soul of a wounded nation." And I thought that was just such an apt way to, sort of think about today, like to think about this space of healing, this space of just allowing two really important feminists of our time to be in conversation. So what's going to happen is that Amma and I, after we do the bios and the introduction, are going to leave Mmatshilo and Professor Boswell to be in conversation with each other. And then once they're finished having a conversation, we'll include all the live audience who want to sort of ask questions, make comments, because this is also in many ways a celebration of a life, in many ways a celebration of like a really incredible life, right? Like many of us who know the story of Mmatshilo knows like we're celebrating a courageous spirit today. And so that's what we'll be doing. So if you have flowers to give her this afternoon, please, we welcome all the flowers. We really welcome all the flowers. I just want to start here. I see people are already saying excited for this conversation. So Jojo Martin, who's watching us on YouTube, is already excited for this conversation, and we're excited for that. So I'm going to hand over to Alma just to do to read the bio, and then I'll read the other one, and then we'll open up the conversation.
Thank you so much, Toki. I have the supreme honor and pleasure, really, of introducing Mmatshilo Motsei, who is founder of Africa Ikalafe, an organization which specializes in personal and societal transformation that is founded on African spiritual principles. Her overall aim is to uncover the old truth that Africa is great and powerful, and that because of the poisoning of our mind, our soul is afflicted. Consequently, Africa's traumatic past has led to a condition which calls for multi-generational healing. Hence the name Africa Ikalafe, which means Africa, heal thyself. An African mystic, author, healer, and midwife. Mmatshilo started her career as a nurse, midwife, and nursing lecturer, social science researcher, and community development facilitator. With a BA Hons in psychology and an MA in creative writing, she uses writing as a tool for healing. Her line of work has seen her travel extensively across Africa, Europe, North Africa, and Asia, while making a considerable impact in rural communities in her own country of South Africa. In 2013, she undertook a 7-day climb of Mount Kilimanjaro to raise funds for AIDS orphans in Maviljan village in Mpumalanga province. Mmatshilo believes that the future lies in people's ability to transcend their smallness and reconcile with their innate power. Using a combination of stories, proverbs, idioms, and creative writing, her remarkable presentations not only electrify the stage, but also create an opportunity for the audience to experience dynamic personal transformation. Through the years, she's learned to master the arts of nurturing the genius in people by grinding through her own fears and limitations, as well as sharing her journey through her writing. Mmatshilo has learned the rare skill of celebrating the power within. She is currently registered for a PhD in sociology at the University of Pretoria. In her quest to decolonize childbirth practices in post-apartheid South Africa, her research focuses on the role of indigenous midwifery in countering obstetric violence. Welcome. We are so excited for the conversation that lies ahead, Mmatshilo.
Thank you. Thank you so much. It's so nice to be here.
Thank you so much, Alma. I already feel like we're in like the company of greatness.
Listen.
Like after just that bio, I'm like, you know what? We can go home. The work has been done. We can go home.
Listen.
I have the pleasure of reading Professor Boswell's bio. Professor Barbara Boswell is the head of English at the University of Cape Town. She's a feminist literature scholar with an interest in Black diasporic women's writing, Black South African women's literature, and queer theory. She earned a PhD from Harriet Tubman Department of Women's Studies from the University of Maryland, College Park in 2010, after joining the Department of Women, Gender, and Sexuality Studies as a Fulbright scholar. Her M.Phil was completed at the Women and Gender Studies program at the University of Western Cape. She's currently the head of the Department of English at the University of Cape Town. She's also the author of 2 books. One, Grace, a novel which won the University of Johannesburg Debut Prize in 2017. And then the other one is she's the author of a really fantastic book called And Wrote My Story Anyway, Black South African Women's Novels as Feminism. And now we have the distinct pleasure to hand it over to you, Professor Boswell. We're going to remove ourselves from the stream, but we'll be back.
Thank you. Thank you so much, Lehlohonolo and Alman Alicia. It is such an honor to be here today and to speak to Mmatshilo Motsei. Welcome, and welcome to all the people who are watching and listening from wherever. I know sometimes people are here from across the globe. We've heard a phenomenal biography. As Lehlohonolo rightly says, we're in the presence of greatness. We have been gifted with so much amazing and important feminist work from someone who I can describe as a writer, activist, healer, spiritual coach, scholar, poet, short storyteller, essayist, feminist, fighter for social justice. And I'm absolutely honored to be in this conversation with you, Mmatshilo. I'm going to briefly introduce your books. You have been so prolific in your outputs in the writing that you've done. And when I read your work, I see it as spanning 2 broad periods. The first is in the early 2000s, early to mid 2000s, and then a later crop, which we are just seeing coming out this year, a very bountiful gift to all of us. The first book was a collection of personal essays called Hearing Visions, Seeing Voices. And this documents your journey, amongst other things, becoming a spiritual healer, the calling you received, and how you learned to follow that story. And it intertwines beautifully with stories of work, motherhood, and also stories of the nation. In telling the individual story, you are often addressing and engaging the nation. The second book that I think is a key and pivotal text in South Africa that I think every South African should read is the Kanga and the Kangaroo Court, Reflections on the Rape Trial of Jacob Zuma. And this book is a very incisive yet devastating look at rape as a scourge which plagues us in this nation, in this country, globally. And in this book, Mmatshilo has looked at the ways in which rape operates as a weapon of patriarchy, as part of the military-industrial complex, and as part of keeping women in a specific place. And she puts this phenomenon of rape into conversation with global politics, for example, when she examines rape as a weapon of war. This is vital reading for anyone who cares about social justice in this country. In 2017, Mmatshilo published Reweaving the Soul of the Nation, which is, again, a series of essays which combines African philosophy and with a very specific decolonial look at what it takes to heal a nation and reconstruct ourselves after all the trauma that we have been through as a nation. The latest books that are being offered also today, and I want to just remind you that there's a wonderful package going that you can buy of 4 of these books, and they are amazing. Sesesedi Whirlwind, a collection of poetry in Setswana and English. Find Your Star and Live Your Purpose, African Spiritual Lessons from Me Morongwana. And then the one that I'm going to be talking mostly about today, hopefully, is Istraight Lendaba, which is a collection of short stories and which I've had the pleasure of reading quite closely. We will come to some of these novels, I don't think, or some of these books. I don't think we'll have time to talk about all of them, but I really want to start, Mmatshilo, with welcoming you once again into the space, thanking you for your output, which has been vital and so important, and important even for someone like me who is growing all the time as a feminist and my feminist consciousness and development. The first question I wanted to ask you, you have all these tools in your arsenal. You are a facilitator, you have started NGOs, you work on workshops, violence against women, you've worked in government, you've worked for the president, Nelson Mandela, on gender-based violence, and were part of the structures that set up the gender machinery that we have in this country. Why writing? What does writing have to offer the nation, which is something you are very pertinently engaged with every step of the way, that your other activisms does not offer?
Well, maybe because writers don't die, you know. Maybe it's because when you write something down, you live it beyond your own personal life. So that's one reason I write, because, you know, even at this point, there are so many classics that we read. An example could be a person of like Shakespeare. You know, when did Shakespeare die? And people are still reading Shakespeare. So the best way to leave a legacy is to write it. And that's why I'm writing. But also the other reason why I'm writing is because writing saves my life all the time, you know. I remember at the time after writing Kanga, the Kangaroo Court, and I was there in isolation on my own, there was a time when I felt dead inside. And the only time that I felt alive was when I got to my computer and started writing. And a lot of the essays that are in Reweaving the Soul of the Nation were written during that time when I was really down. And writing for me almost was like that spark of life when I feel down. Thirdly, writing is my calling. So by writing, I'm honoring my calling. And I do kind of expand a little bit on the meaning of calling in the book, Find Your Star, that most of the time when we hear about a calling, we tend to think about narrow calling, like maybe being called to priesthood or being called to be initiated as a Sangoma and so on, when in fact we're all called to different things. I mean, artists are also called. And so writing for me is one way of honoring my calling.
Thank you. I want to read a little bit from the Kanga and the Kangaroo Court, where you write, for a nation emerging from a protracted war that required numbing of the soul and hardening of the heart to achieve political liberation, an awakening of the spirit embedded in the ancient African philosophy of Phela ke phele, live and let live, is one of the greatest challenges for leaders and the nation as a whole. indeed, one of the most important questions facing us is, can the revival and reintegration of this principle into our lives solve the current state of moral decay? Now, this is a strand through all of your work, or most of your work. You talk about regeneration, and specifically moral regeneration in this country. How important is that, do you think, as a part of healing and of transforming ourselves and of actualizing social justice in this country?
My work is based mainly on what I call the constitution of the soul. And the issue is, we can have, as we say, we have the best constitution in the world. We can have the best pieces of legislation. We can have a powerful legislative framework. We can have great institutions. But if the constitution of the soul and the mind is in tatters like it is now, you will have a situation where during COVID, people will not even have a conscience to steal from the fund that is reserved, to help people. So the phrase that I wrote about in the book of phela ke phele, live, let live, is what is dead in the modern, kind of the current generation of leaders. And unfortunately, we're passing it on even to the leaders that come behind us, that in a sense, because the constitution of the soul and the mind is dead, the constitution of the country does not, it failed to serve us. There's a need to combine the two, to combine the constitution as the law and what I call the spirit of the law. The spirit of the law, the supreme law of humanity. This is basically what I'm interested in, what I write about most of the time, what I call the fractured soul of the nation.
Thank you. And this is so apparent in your work, how you interweave, to use your own term, different structures that can be used for transformation. So you've mentioned the legal system. You've mentioned, or I've mentioned, the gender machinery that President Nelson Mandela introduced in 1995. And then also the spiritual. What is really essential, I think, about your work, and what I really appreciated in hearing visions, seeing voices, is that idea that we are also spiritual beings. We cannot transform our society, we cannot transform ourselves, we cannot transform this country without knowing our spirituality, claiming it or reclaiming it, however you want to think of that. I wanted to ask then about the Kanga and the Kangaroo Court. When you wrote that book, it must have been out of a sense of profound disillusionment, but also hurt. You said you felt in the introduction, you felt like you'd been personally affronted and hurt by this incident, to put it euphemistically. What was the cost of breaking that silence for you?
I wrote that book for two reasons. And in both instances, the root is rage. In the first instance was that I have been actively involved in this country in kind of creating the foundation of the national gender machinery. And at the time when we were putting together the legislative framework that deals with violence against women, and at the time where women of this country could point to so many victories that they had acquired pre and post 1994, and just to see one individual take that away from us, and I felt that I felt something burning inside of me, that the only way I could do at that point as a writer was write. But I wasn't planning to write the book because I was so broken every day by the trial, just reading in the media, watching television, everything that's coming out of there, I was consumed by rage and pain. And then I would go back home and kind of just explode onto my family because I didn't have anywhere else to go. And I remember them saying, but you are a writer, why don't you write about it? And then I thought, wow, that's a good idea. And the minute the idea of writing came, I literally wrote that book in 4 months. 4 months, I had written it, it was out. The second reason why I wrote it was if Sesesedi took a chance to report and she knew what she was up against, but she decided to do it anyway. I was pushed. I was inspired by her courage. And I thought that if there is one way in which I could contribute to the gift that she gave us, because when you are raped by a powerful person and you go and report, breaking the silence comes at heavy, heavy, heavy cost. And when Sesesedi did that, she didn't do that for her only. She did it for us as South African women. And that's why I decided to write. And obviously, when I was writing, the idea of what is going to happen to me afterwards did come. But I always say that luckily, when you are an activist and when you believe in your truth, you need to have like some degree of, you need to be stubborn. And I have quite a bit of that. And then that's why I continued. I remember the day we launched the book at the Constitution Hill in 2007. A few days earlier, my brothers started getting worried and they said that, do you think you would need a bodyguard? And my mom says, no, she doesn't. Nobody's going to touch her. And when we were working out, and I invited my mother to the launch to do family praise because I needed centering, because I was wobbly. I wasn't strong inside. The thing about being an activist is that many of us who look strong from the outside are very vulnerable inside. And we kind of dig into that vulnerability. We use the vulnerability as fuel. At least that's what I do, that when I feel wobbly and there's a need for me to do something, I use that vulnerability as my power. So after writing the book, obviously, it's a long story, which, people keep on saying that they need an after Kanga book. And I've been saying the book doesn't want to write itself. But I also discovered that there's a lot of things that I have forgotten. And I'm reminded by people who were there, like my daughter would say, you remember, moms, this and this happened. I said, did that happen? And then I realized that because it was too painful, there's a lot of things that I repressed, a lot of things that I repressed because I needed to survive psychologically. So, lost a house, car, no income for many years. And because I've always been working outside of the system. And I think maybe that book will come. If it's not a book, I think the easiest thing would be a documentary, for the story to tell. Because that's one terrain that I'm still not able to speak about, and I cannot speak about healing if I don't heal myself. So that's one room, if you like, that I must still revisit for my own healing. And when the time is right, I'll get a facilitator, I'll get a healer, because a healer does not heal herself. I can't heal myself. When the time is right, someone will come into my life. Someone will help me to spew out the story. that needs to come out.
Wow. So a process of midwifery, to use another modality that you're working with or have worked with. Thank you for answering that question. I can only imagine how difficult it remains. As you're saying, there's still healing that needs to be done. I want to move now to the different sets of books, and I'm really interested in what I know you have done a MFA in creative writing. So you're very adept and schooled in different modes of writing, and you've moved from that earlier essay, or this is a very hard. The Kanga is almost like an not investigative, but a expository piece about rape, or book about rape. And you've moved now to creative writing more, so the poetry collection and the short story collection, which I'm very excited to read again and again and again, and to teach. But what engendered that shift in you, or was it always there? Can you tell us a bit about the process of moving from more formal, almost like reportage, essaying, and then to a different mode of creativity, like fiction and poetry?
Right. I went to do an MA in creative writing at Rhodes in 2015, and I went there full time, no bursary, no income, and that's the story of my life. You know, I'm the type of person that just jumps into things. And the reason why I went to do the MA in creative writing is that I had noticed that I had begun to censor myself. I had become to kind of reduce my voice. And I noticed that I was driven by fear, you know, most of the time when I had to speak or write. So, and then I went to do MA creative writing. And interestingly, when I got there was a way in which my experience of doing MA creative writing was similar to being initiated as a healer, you know, because I was aware of the resistance that I had, you know, when I had to write, and especially within a structure. Because if you are full-time in 1 year, it's a structure. You have to read so many books. You need to do this and this and that. And in the initial period, there was a resistance within me. What saved me was, I always tell the story that what saved me was one Friday when I presented one of my first short stories, and it was ripped apart. And of course, you know, my confidence was completely shattered. And then I remember walking the streets of Makanda, and at one particular point, a voice said to me, the best way of surviving this is to go through it as if you know nothing. And that's what saved me. When I decided that I know nothing about creative writing, because ego is problematic. I could say that I have written 2 books, so I know everything about writing, and then that will stop me from learning what I needed to learn. Another thing is that when I got there, I was clear. I'm not doing any short stories. I'm not doing poetry. I said I'd rather do a biography or essays. You know, I said I'm an essayist. I'm a nonfiction writer. I'm not touching fiction. And I remember Robert Barol says, that's too early, Mmatshilo. Allow the process to unfold. And then it turns out that as time went on, I was kind of so absorbed by flash fiction. And the idea of having the whole story in one paragraph excited me. And so I began to read more and more about flash fiction. And, you know, then my confidence grew. But I always say that we are storytellers. And my first professor of creative writing is my grandmother, who told me stories in a tin shack. What that did for me was grow my imagination. there is no way that you can be a creative without a rich imagination. So then as I was writing, I found myself pulling so much from my grandmother's library of stories, and even remembering the feelings that I used to feel when we are around the fire. And so I draw from that as well. You know, I draw from the fact that as African people, we have this in our DNA. And, you know, apartheid and colonialism has taught us that we have nothing, but we have plenty of this in our DNA. And that's why at this point, I'm able to weave. As far as poetry, we have family praise poems. So when we grow up, reciting family praise poems. So we are born poets, you know. So the challenge is how to package it in such a way that it's acceptable by institutions of higher learning, as an example. So I'm bringing all of that. My childhood in a village, in a township, all my experiences, my spirituality, everything. I'm bringing it into my writing.
Thank you. And thank goodness for grandmothers who told us stories. And I often wonder about my own grandmother, what would she have been, was it not for the accident of birth, of being born in the wrong place, in the wrong time in this country? And as you say, the weight of colonialism, racism, sexism. With your short story collection, I read it in one sitting. I had put together aside, you know, a day or two, and I sat at my computer and I read it in one go. I couldn't put it down. I loved them. They are very richly woven, like a tapestry of the everyday. And they show us the texture of South Africa 30 years into, or how many years we are now into democracy. And you've described it as stories from about people in the margins or on the margins of our society. And what is striking about this collection for me is that, yes, there is quite a bit of violence. There's sexual violence and other forms of structural violences that are committed against or by these characters. But never in the reading did I feel completely overwhelmed with heaviness, because the characters are also so full of agency, and they're always doing these things. They're seeing the gap and taking the gap and remaking life. And I found it quite an astoundingly beautifully wrought, very simple stories, but quite deep and quite full of wisdom. What made you particularly choose this genre of short story, and were there any challenges for you in writing this? Why this collection now?
I mean, I have already briefly answered that question as well. You know, my intention was not to touch fiction at all. And then as time went on, I found that I am a storyteller. And the only thing that I needed to do was to marry my kind of innate gift of storytelling with the way of writing it for MA creative writing, as an example. And I also drew a lot from my work with rural women, because I spent quite a lot of time working with rural women. After I started ADAPT, an organization that deals with violence against women in Alex, and then after that, I got burnt out and I went to work in Limpopo and Mpumalanga with rural women. And a lot of the stories are informed by that time, because when a rural woman comes, and maybe they kneel to show their respect, or they do something that when you look at it, it looks like they are submissive, but they are actually not submissive. You know, there's a certain power they bring. So that's why my characters are like that. Even though they are subjected to violence, even though they are poor, but they are essentially, they carry power in that way. And also the humor as well, you know, the humor of everyday life. And you know, when I lived in Marveljan, after writing Kanga, there was a time when I was very depressed. And then I worked with this organization of women that are that were taking care of AIDS orphans. And they laugh from the belly. Their laughter, they laugh from the belly. And they've never heard of antidepressants. And when you go into their homes, they have nothing. But the power of laughter and how they carry what might crush us, how they carry their lives is what informed, you know, some of the characters in the collection.
And that is it's like a new mode of writing. I'm thinking there are so many exciting news stories coming out in South Africa by Black women specifically, which is the area that I study. And I want to ask you next about the queer characters. And it's wonderful actually to see Black women writing queer characters, queer stories. And I'm thinking here, there's just been a lot of activity. For the first time, queerness is represented. We are seeing ourselves being written into the literary canon, and it's wonderful. I'm thinking of Makhosazana Xaba's Running and Other Stories, just to mention one. Kiletso Mopai, If You Keep Digging, and now your volume. And these are all volumes of short stories that have this queer articulation. And why was that important for you?
I think basically it's just an illustration of how powerful we are as women, and that you know, the queer characters, the intention was to completely turn patriarchy on its head, especially, you know, the rule of the head of the household, who was a very powerful man, and who thought that he had power over them. And there's a certain way in which patriarchy makes men to believe that they have power over women. But why this has continued is because women also believe that men have power over them. You know, so the story for me was just to turn things upside down, and to open up the space of different identities, how we self-identify as women. And this also, the queer story for me, what's exciting about it is that it's in the village, it's in the rural, it's not in a city. So it's just a way of taking back our power in all its manifestations.
Thank you. Another question I have is about publishing and your engagement with the publishing industry, because your first books were published by Jacana, and I'm not sure, I know that these are now self-published. You've moved into that realm. And why did you make that particular decision?
Hearing Visions and Kanga and the Kangaroo Court were published by Jacana. But then as soon as I published Reweaving, I was trying out. I just tried out, you know, to see if I would be able to self-publish. Obviously, it's a misnomer, self-publishing, but you don't necessarily do it on your own. You work with different people. Obviously, you work with an editor, a proofreader, a designer, and all of that. So I work with people who are skilled in different aspects of publishing, and I work with them to help me package, like put together a book. What is exciting for me is being involved from the first sentence of writing a book to kind of holding it in your hand and being involved in the entire cycle. Obviously, I always say that publishing is easy. What is difficult is distribution. Distribution is difficult. That's something that I have not yet figured out. But I'm also not in a hurry. I kind of distributing and selling books as and when I have time and space. It's something that, but the main reason why I'm doing this is that when I self-publish, all the rights of my work belong to me. I was the first chair of the Credo Motwa Foundation. I helped to start Credo Motwa Foundation. The rights of Indaba, my children, and many other of Ntate Motwa's books does not belong to him. They belong in some trusts somewhere. And I think that experience of working on Credo Motwa Foundation influenced me in some way, you know, that I'd like to create something that, you know, all the rights of my creative work belong to me. And they sit in my trust rather than sitting in somebody else's trust.
I think that is so important because we've been, well, I can't speak for we, but just this publishing industry really needs to be revamped and decolonized. And we've seen like Koleka Potuma has taken back her rights and she's publishing her own work because she wants to own her rights. And I think this is almost like the next frontier for Black writers and Black women and queer Black women specifically to have that ownership of the rights, because just you know, and to see the publishing industry transformed in that way, and Black owned and women owned, Black women owned presses. I think those are really important because where ownership of our work resides, as you rightly point out, is also a political issue, and who you know, benefits from that and in which ways. So that's exciting for me to hear as someone who also watches the publishing industry. I want to ask now if you want to read from the collection, one of your favorite pieces. I've told you what my favorite short story is, but maybe your something that you really would like to share today as a taste of what in the short story collection readers can expect.
Okay, I'm going to read a very short one, which is influenced by growing up in a village in Khomo. When I wrote the story, I imagined this man. There's a river flowing a distance from the village called Nokanapedi. So this was kind of inspired by that image. And when I wrote it, it then turned into a poem. So I wrote it almost like a poem, and it's titled When the Cows Come Home. From the distance, he looks like a painting, motionless, sitting on a rock, except for the frail trail of smoke rising out of his pipe and the dogs flaring their nostrils lazily at his feet. Time seemed to stand still. From west to east, the blue sky welcomed crisp shreds of ember. Soon, the dogs will stretch and yawn. They can read his thoughts. They know that too. They know that soon he will rise from the rock perched on the hill. First come the spitting, accurate and acute. Then the emptying of the pipe, followed by the long whistle and the cracking of the pipe. Cows stop grazing. Egrets take to the sky only to return to the hill. One egret, the one that is always on the back of the bull, flies down to the ground and stands on one leg. A few others snack on the remaining ticks before they fly to their nests. An indolent return of the herd to the kraal, led by Motsei, as always. Despite the African proverb, unlit pipe hanging from the side of his lips, walking stick in one hand, whip across the opposite shoulder, an empty water bottle tied to his waist with a string. Two brown emaciated village dogs on either side, panting gently, leaving a trail of drips of saliva on the ground, all in a cloud of dust rising from the ground, from which grass refuses to grow. So this piece, the small piece, I look at herds of cattle when they come back in the village. They're always led by a cow, not a bull. But there's a proverb in Setswana that says, meaning a herd of cattle led by a female will be led astray. They're not led astray. And I use the name for Motsei for this cow. Interestingly, many of the cows in the villages, many of the cows have Afrikaans names. I don't know why, you know. So Motsei is the leader. And many herds of cattle are led by the cow, not by the bull. And in a sense, that's the essence of that story.
It's the contradictions inherent in the everyday and how we make sense of them and live with them. Thank you for that. I want to ask, as someone who's committed to social justice, to activism, to feminism, womenism, and this is a question I grapple with myself. Does writing matter? Can writing heal? Can writing change things?
Writing matters. Writing is word. Word heals. Word can destroy. It can injure. It can traumatize, because we have, for instance, we have verbal abuse. But words can also heal, can comfort. So writing, it helps. But also, writing is like a painting. It gives you a mirror. It kind of gives you a mirror to make sense of what you are going through. One of the tools that I use in conversations with my womb, I use creative writing a lot. Like there's a module called Healing the Mother Wound or Healing the Father Wound. And essentially one of the exercises would be writing a letter to your mother or writing a letter to your father. When somebody says write a letter to, it looks very simple, but it's so deep. The stuff that comes out of that, or even the resistance of even writing a letter to your mother if your relationship with your mother is completely broken. The resistance that comes from the idea of writing a letter. So I don't think that I can survive without writing. The other thing that I can't survive without is music, because I believe that artists are healers, and I believe that artists are called, and they use all different mediums to help us make sense of our lives. It could be a life of joy, it could be a life of pain, it could be a kind of transformation that we need to go through. So writing does matter, but at an intellectual level, at an academic level, writing matters because knowledge production is contested territory. And it's important for more and more Black women to write because knowledge production is critical. If we are talking about decolonizing curriculum, but we still go to school and read textbooks that does not take from our lived experiences or that are not written by us. So, you know, we haven't gone far. So writing matters for political reasons for that, but it also matters for psychological reasons. It also matters for spiritual reasons because, I mean, we use writing to heal. So it matters at different levels. But the other way in which I am kind of understanding your question is some people say, people are dying, people are going through a hard time, and somehow it feels like to sit and write is a luxury. It is not a luxury. Audre Lorde has spoken to us about that there's no single issue struggle. And the fact that we have multiple issues struggle is because different people are called to intervene at different spaces and different ways. And all of that can be brought together cumulatively, will kind of have a dent in whatever struggle that we're dealing with. But also, you know, the idea of feeling guilty about being in a good space is also problematic. Because struggle, when you are an activist, you are not necessarily, it's not necessary for you to be in a dark space because you are working with dark issues. My issue is if you are working with dark issues, it's okay for you to be in a light space because it helps you to carry that better. Number one. Number two, it helps people that you are working with to see a different image of how you can be in this world.
Thank you. That's profound. We've got less than 10 minutes left. And as you say, if it's a calling, as you felt you were called to write, amongst other things, then honoring that calling is also honoring your soul's purpose. And that is always helpful in creating a less fractured world. I think if more people were able to fulfill their soul's purpose, there would be much less strife and bitterness and unhappiness within larger political structures and within the personal. I am not sure, Mmatshilo, how the question and answer from the people who are watching is going to work. I'm only seeing a screen in front of me. Yes. Before we stop, before I go, may I please share the wonderful news, Mmatshilo, that Mmatshilo will be awarded tomorrow an honorary doctorate in integrative healing for her integrative healing work at the from the University of Zululand. Congratulations! What a wonderful honor and how befitting.
Thank you. Thank you so much. Thank you, Barbara. Thanks.
Thank you so much, Professor Boswell and Mmatshilo. I don't know. I just felt like I was sitting at a place of healing. And I just love this conversation so much. I just felt like I want to hear more and more because I think there's so much deeper that you can go into, right? But, you know, we don't have that much time. I'm just adding Alma to the stream. But honestly, that was like a deeply profound conversation. You know, when the elders used to speak, right? And you wanted to learn from the elders, like you were talking earlier about storytelling and how we're grateful for, you know, our grandparents for being the ones who were storytellers. It felt like this in many ways, like I'm going to come back into this conversation and just reflect, right? Because I think there's a very profound thing Mmatshilo said was, you know, you asked a question about like Kanga, and she spoke about the idea of, you know, she doesn't know if there's going to be a book or if there's going to be a documentary, but she said, you know, a healer needs to heal themselves. And that has sat with me, you know, just the idea of like this work cannot be meaningful if we are not doing it for ourselves. So thank you very much for this really riveting conversation.
Thank you. This is wonderful. Thank you for having me.
Thank you.
I just want to say, I see Lebo Ramafoko is very happy. She says, Halala, Dr. Mmatshilo Tumelo. So she's celebrating with you. And Josie is also, wow, congratulations. Josie's also a comment from Facebook says, I also love the words of healing. I'm needing to process my own story of trauma and healing, but I felt so much healing. So this is also an opportunity if you want to give Mmatshilo her flowers, please just pop some comments on the comment box from wherever you're joining us from, and then we'll read them to you, to her. And if you have any questions for both the panelists, we can also ask them. Alma, do you want to share some reflections?
So I'm just like taking it, and I think there's something so powerful about hearing people who precede you speak, right? To speak about what it means to heal ourselves. I think that we're having renewed conversations around how important it is for us to heal. I think we're seeing what it means for all of this unhealed generational trauma to continue to manifest itself in our communities, in our families, but even in the relationships that we have with ourselves and with each other. And so I really loved what Mmatshilo said about just the ability to recognize the ways in which we cannot heal ourselves and the ability to seek help and seek it outside of yourself. You know, there's just something about the recognition that there are things that you may not be able to do for yourself. Because I think so many of us have learned hyper independence, where you just feel like you're going to do things. You have to be the one who does certain things, because so many of us have had to be that for ourselves. And I'm just sitting here and I'm reflecting on what it means to have, you know, just your feminist practices come into so many different areas, right? Even in childbirth, right? Even in childbirth, and you think of like the rates, particularly overseas, of just obstetric maternal deaths, right? And you think of that as it relates to Black women and how much trauma and how much healing needs to take place there. And for me, this has just been the kind of conversation that piques my interest, but also makes me think about my own personal practice, right? What does it mean to really put into practice so many of your own ideals? You know, so those are just my personal reflections. And I think that I speak for so many of us when I say that this has been such an enlightening conversation.
There's a question from Jess on Facebook. Jess asked, what compelled you to work on birth violence for your PhD in sociology? And what are you hoping your readers will learn from this essential research you have embarked on?
I think my PhD research is combining many other aspects of my life. The beauty about being in your 60s is that you have lived a life. So you can practically go into any room and just take, whatever you need from there. So it's combining, I started my career as a nurse and a midwife. And then I moved on to work in the area of gender-based violence. And then I stumbled into the notion of obstetric violence. And I started reading a lot on obstetric violence. And then I found that my issue has always been the marginalization and the suppression of Indigenous midwifery and Indigenous midwives. And when I read more and more into the history of what used to happen in the Cape Colony at the time, with the arrival of the settlers, and then and how some of the women, some of the European women who were giving birth had no knowledge of midwifery, that there were Indigenous women there who had the knowledge, but it was not allowed for a European woman to go and consult what they kind of called dirty women who give birth on their own in the field. So reading all of that and the politics of midwifery, in a sense that midwifery from law, it has always been something that's done by women, and the takeover by male obstetricians was also something that interests me. What I hope people will learn from that, number one, obstetric violence is common. Women who give birth, if they were to tell you what they have experienced, it's common, but it's a kind of gender-based violence, and it is gender-based violence. It's a kind of gender-based violence that we don't speak about. And so number one, obstetric violence will be out in the open. And then we'll start redefining. I doubt if the national strategy plan of GBV mentions obstetric violence. I haven't checked, but I doubt if it does mention that. And number two, the reason why, what I hope will come out of this is that my idea is to uncover the knowledge that our ancestors have about birthing. For instance, a simple thing like when you give birth in hospital, the minute the baby is out, they cut the cord, even before the placenta has been born. But the elders don't do that. You know, they wait for the placenta to be born. And in fact, they only cut the cord when the cord stops pulsating. And in some sense, then even suck blood towards the baby or draw blood towards the baby from the umbilical cord. But I'm also interested in some of the rituals that our elders used to do, like your placenta was buried somewhere in the ground. And what is the symbolic meaning of placentas being buried in the ground? It was century, you know. So I'm interested in the idea of land as a spiritual asset, because the placenta is your first home, you know, and when you take your first home and bury it in the land, what does that mean? Spiritually, what does that mean? So our placentas are burned in incinerators. We don't even know where they end up. And so those are some of the things that I'm intending to do. My big dream is to start a holistic birthing space where if you want to give birth and you want to bring your grandmother with or your healer with, and so that when, you know, the baby comes out, the baby comes out with invocation of praise poems, that when you are born, there's an old woman there chanting the names of the people that you come from. And this is how you would enter into the world. And that's my dream. Imagine what that could be, because the drip, putting of the drip and putting us on lithotomy or sleeping on our bed, it's rituals. They're Western rituals. They're medical rituals. And Western medical rituals do not allow our birthing rituals. So that's essentially what I hope to create before. That is my last contribution before I pass on. I kind of say that that's my last contribution. Once that's done, I'll be happy to die.
There's another question here on Facebook. Thank you so much. I wonder if Mmatshilo could share with us what she draws courage and strength from. Thank you for being so heroic and also sharing that you don't always feel strong.
I draw my strength from allowing myself to break down when I don't feel strong. I draw myself from knowing that I'm not always strong. I draw my strength from just falling apart if I need to. I give myself permission to fall apart. And I don't subscribe to the strong woman notion. When people say, wow, you're such a strong woman, I said, I'm also a weak woman. So I don't want to be one thing because I'm not one thing. But I also draw strength from my mom who's strong. But the sad thing, I must say, the notion of strong women, I've never seen my mother cry. She's 86, 87. I know she's gone through a hard time. my question has always been, what does she do with her pain? How does she process? We come from a generation of mothers and grandmothers who were conditioned to be strong, and they didn't. So I take my power from there to say I'm very much fascinated by the power of vulnerability. Even when I work with people, and I always say that many of the issues that I work with or I work on are issues that I'm dealing with personally. So it's my own personal struggles. So when I engage with people as a healer, I don't heal per se, you know. I am in a co-healing process where I listen to how other people deal with their struggles and they heal me. And so I draw my strength from there. But I think also old age helps because you let go of, you don't have to prove anything to anybody. If you fall apart, that's okay. You know, people will say, oh, she's old anyway, and then that will be okay as well. Yeah, so I draw my strength from life.
There's a comment here where the person says, I'm amazed that your natural calling, nursing or midwifery, is also part of your spiritual calling, giving birth to healing in your place of influence and writing. And I don't know if you'd like to expand a little bit on that idea.
I'm amazed actually that I'm able to do that. that would be my response. I like the idea of the metaphor of weaving. All of my work is informed by weaving. Actually, I was saying to someone, I want to learn weaving as an art. Because when you weave, you bring different strands of textures and colors, and you weave them together, and they end up being such a beautiful work of art. Yeah, all of my work is weaving different experiences from different people, from different eras, different colors, textures, and in creating a beautiful work of art.
Thank you so much. Here's another question here. Alma will just, oh no. Yeah, okay. So the question has been asked already. Okay, great, wonderful. Thank you so much for this. So this is what Lebo says on Facebook. I love how you're challenging against notions of which voice we listen to. And I think that largely has been this conversation that we often speak about decolonization, but when we speak about decolonization, we don't talk about the importance of indigenous knowledge, that we have to actually go to the source and the root, and that is where we are going to get the answers that we need in order to decolonize. I see there's Krista on Facebook says, thank you, Barbara and the Cheekinators, for this wonderful conversation with the most inspiring Mmatshilo. And another person says, being here is being on the healing fire, the healing. And I think just before we let go from the Cheekinators to say, thank you so much for your life. I think more importantly, thank you so much for, I don't want to say for your bravery, but I think thank you so much for accepting your calling, because that's what you call it, you know. You said that you were true to your calling. And I think because you've been true to your calling, we've had this wonderful array of essays, short stories, poetry, but also work that we are able to take forward going on, knowing that if you were able to do the work that you have done, it has created space for the Cheekinators. It has created spaces for scholars like Professor Boswell. So thank you really so much for your work and for your life.
Thank you. Thank you so much. Thank you for creating this.
Thank you.
And everyone, thank you once again. As we've said, we'll share on our Facebook, on our social media, how you can get a hold of the full package of Mmatshilo's work, because you need to have it in your library. So we will share information about how you can get it and how we as the Cheeky Merchant can facilitate bringing books so that you're able to have access to them. Once again, thank you everyone for joining us. Very special thank you to you, Professor Boswell, for being in conversation. And a very, very special thank you to you, Mmatshilo, for coming. And from tomorrow, we will, call you Doctor. Because
not yet. Okay, thank you.
Thank you. Bye, everyone.
Bye.
Yes.